Welcome to Under the Rug at Work, where I shine light on problems that are normally swept under the rug. Today, I'm chatting with Jess about her experience with gaslighting and workers' comp at work. Jess has a background in innovation and she's on a mission to empower people to embrace their onlyness. Jess, thank you so much for your courage in sharing your story.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Can you share what is onlyness?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So, onlyness is a concept that was developed by Nilofer Merchant in her book. And I'm just going to read it directly from here because I won't do it justice. So, she talks about the fact that you're the only person standing in a spot in the world that only you stand in, a function of your history and experiences, visions, and hopes. From this spot where only you stand, you offer a distinct point of view, novel insights, and even groundbreaking ideas. And what makes onlyness different to things like unique is that you are the only person who is you. You might be unique because you have a certain characteristic from a certain perspective at a certain moment in time, but that doesn't make you you. And onlyness is what makes you you. And it's about empowering people to actually figure out what their onlyness is and embracing that.
Yeah, I love that. And that ties in so well with your experience and your story because it does make you you. Can you share with us a bit about your experience and what are some of the things that has happened to you at work?
Yeah, so my story starts on a dark March morning. I woke up and thought, if I go for a walk now and get attacked, at least I'll get time off work. So that moment had been building for several months. I'd started a new job that I felt like I was manipulated into taking. And I was identifying all of these issues that I kept raising repeatedly. And it became more and more frustrating. And I was becoming more overwhelmed. I was losing my motivation. And then it finally reached a point where every single day I'd wake up, go to work, and I'd fall into a new sinkhole. And then I'd spend the rest of the day trying to crawl my way out. And it reached a point where my mental health it was too much. I had to stop. Mm-hmm. So I saw a psychologist. And in my first appointment, he said that we should think of work as a dial and it goes from 0 to 10. For most people, they'll work at a 2 or a 3 and they'll push themselves to a 5 or a 6 if they need to. But for me, my baseline was an 8 and I'd been trying to push it beyond 10 for so long that the only way to fix it was to completely remove it and start from scratch and take a break. Mm. So I left that appointment and made the bravest decision I've ever made. I decided to take an extended period of time off. So I told my boss I was taking 3 months leave so I could focus on my mental health and prioritize my health. Mm. So while I was on leave, my only homework, my only job was to figure out who I was outside of work. And I literally had no idea because my entire life had been about climbing up that corporate ladder, getting the next job, saying yes to any opportunity that arose. And so I started doing what I do whenever I don't know the answer. I just started researching. And I was telling my friends of all of the things that I was doing, and they were really intrigued and interested in it. So I decided to start what's now become the Self Paradox blog, where I would share what I was doing to figure out who I was outside of work. And that's now become a much bigger piece. But at the time, it was really useful because it did help me figure out who I was outside of work. And then by the time I was ready to go back to work, I was really excited. And then I received an email from my boss saying you either return to work or you remain on leave. And I was devastated because I was so excited to go back to work. My GP and my psychologist had told me that I could return, but I couldn't return to my job. But there was no other option presented. It was you return to your job or remain on leave. So I submitted another month's leave and went back to bed. I was more depressed at that point than I had been after receiving that email than I had been when I first went on leave. And that month was really hard. I was severely depressed, severely anxious. I didn't know what to do.
It wasn't a conversation, it was just an email.
So yeah, I received an email. So we'd had some conversations leading up to that, and I was told I'd need to complete a form, a return to work form. I'd asked for that form repeatedly and not received it. And so receiving that email saying you return on Monday or you remain on leave, I was devastated. I didn't know what to do.
What day did you?
It was I think it was a Friday. Yeah. So I received that email and then but I knew if I went back I'd be dead, because that environment that job specifically was not a job that I could do. For any other person in the entire world, it'd probably be fine. But because of who I am, I couldn't return to that job. So then I had that extra month's leave. And then again, the day that leave expired, which was a Friday afternoon, I received an email saying you return to work or we're placing you on unpaid leave. And at that point, I was devastated. I called my dad in tears. I told him what had happened because I hadn't told him until that point. So that had been, I think I'd been on leave for 4 months and I hadn't told my parents. But he immediately jumped into action mode. So the following week, we had a meeting with my boss in HR, and it became really clear they were way out of their depth. They didn't understand mental health. They didn't understand why I couldn't return to my job. And they hadn't even considered any options, because the options they presented were return to your job, apply for another job, which I wasn't mentally or physically in any position to be doing, or apply for temporary incapacity under my super, which I wasn't eligible for because I'd been medically cleared to return to work. So left that meeting with no outcome about how we were going to go forward. And then a week or two later, received an email saying you return to your job, temporary incapacity under your super, or if you think you've been injured at work, you can apply for a workers' compensation claim.
Mm-hmm.
So that was September by that point, and I first went on leave in March.
That is wild. That is, can I just make a comment?
Yeah.
For anyone who is listening who manages people, this is not the way.
Don't do this.
This is, the poster of you're doing it wrong.
And that's what I found most frustrating, because I was ready to go back to work. I'd been medically cleared to return to work. And because of the no action, I was significantly worse than when I first went on leave. But it's weird to say, but I was really reluctant to go down the workers' comp path just because of all the stigma attached.
Yeah.
But for me, it was a relief, because for the first time in 6 months, someone asked, how are you? And someone asked, what happened? No one at work had asked. And I think that's another reason I couldn't go back to my job, because if they couldn't ask me what had happened, there was no way they were going to fix it. And it was never going to be a safe environment for me.
No. And you probably didn't feel like anyone cared because no one checked in.
No one checked in. It was clear. So once I submitted the workers' comp claim, the return to work officer, whose job it is literally to get me back to work, said, oh, we'll be in touch once an outcome is reached. So they're supposed to stay in contact with you throughout that process to help get you back to work, because either way you need to get back to work.
Yes.
And I didn't hear anything from them during that process.
But it's I don't mean to.
Yeah, no, but it is, you either laugh or you cry. Yeah. And it, like, at the time it was devastating and it was horrible. I lost 10 kilos in a month because I was so anxious I couldn't eat.
Yeah.
But it's like it's the case study of what not to do. Like, if you're a HR professional, if you're even a decent human being, and you read what happened to me, any person would know that was wrong, and know that was not how you respond appropriately in these situations.
made it worse by not
It
including
did.
you, who is the person
Yeah.
that they need
Yeah.
to get back to work.
And all of the research in this space demonstrates the quicker you get back to work, the quicker your recovery, the better you do. And I knew all of that, and I was reading all of that, and I didn't understand why they weren't doing that.
Yeah.
And I think that was the hardest part of all of it, because like even my case manager didn't understand what they were doing. And her job is to help facilitate that process. And even she couldn't understand why they were doing what they were doing. It was a really strange thing to go through.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so sorry you've had to
Thank you.
experience that. Yeah. Oh.
It is, you have to laugh, because if you don't, you cry. And yeah, even at the time, like I wanted to find the humor in it. And so my dad and I, we did find a joke with our corporate values.
Mm-hmm.
So they're in the email signatures of every staff member, and it's something that you really you're supposed to care about them and all that kind of stuff. But in every single correspondence we received, we'd identify something that was contrary to the values.
Yeah.
And so it just became this running joke between my dad and I, where we'd be like, oh, they breached this one today. And so I think you just need to find the humor where you can and focus on what you can control. That was a really big thing for me at that point, because the only thing I could control was me. And that was about 1% of what was happening in my life.
Yeah.
So I just focused on that 1%. And then slowly that 1% became 2%, and then it became 5%, and then it became 10%.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't done that, it would have taken me a lot longer to recover.
Yeah. I am honestly just speechless, and
and we're not even finished yet.
Yeah, I know. And clearly no one ever put themselves in your shoes.
No.
It just doesn't make any sense to me. Someone sending you an email the week before you're due to come back with an ultimatum. That's really what it was.
Mm-hmm.
It was an ultimatum,
Yeah.
not a, how are you going? You, as you said, you were excited to come back to work. And
Yeah.
that assumption on their part just destroyed everything.
Yep. Yeah. And like, I was so devastated. I didn't even bother replying to that email, because what was I supposed to say?
Yeah.
I'm submitting another month's leave. So I just submitted the leave and went back to bed. And then I assumed I'd hear from my boss at least, but I didn't hear from anybody for an entire month. So I just kind of sat there and didn't know what was going to happen next.
Yeah.
Receiving that email, that was one of the things I wish they hadn't done, because that it was a Friday afternoon. I'm pretty sure it was like 4:20 p.m. or something on a Friday that I received that email. So it's not like even if I replied, no one was going to be there to read it. It was also the first email that I was referred to as Jessica instead of Jess. My boss always called me Jess. And so the fact that I was Jessica made it really clear that he hadn't written it, firstly, and that it was, obviously a HR email.
So everything that you went through,
I'm still not done yet.
I know. How did it make you feel?
I felt so hopeless, and I was really confused and lonely. I think because I dedicated a lot of time to figuring out who I was. So I was spending a lot of time writing articles and things like that. But then when I extended my leave and when the anxiety kicked in, I couldn't even do that anymore. It was a battle to get out of bed every day, because I just had these really anxious thoughts. I just had these terrible thoughts running through my head constantly. I started a worry journal, so I wrote them all down. They're all stupid and things that would never, ever happen. But my brain just kept going over and over all of these stupid scenarios that I just couldn't control. And I did take meds for it, and that helped a lot.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that we need to get rid of the stigma about meds. If you need to take something, take it. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Like, I was so anxious, I couldn't do anything. And on the meds, I was able to actually do something. It was a really horrible period. I don't wish it on anybody. And the fact, I think that I removed myself from the situation the second I noticed it getting bad. And then when I tried to return, it then got even worse. It really frustrated me.
So what did you try and do to change the situation, to make it better? Is there anything that you were able to, take control of and try and improve your own work situation? What did you do there?
I did everything right.
Yeah.
When I started my new job and I started to notice different things, I was telling senior leaders. I didn't tell one senior leader one time. I told 5 or 6 senior leaders 10 times each. I was doing everything you're supposed to do in that situation. Nothing was happening. I was being told, you're doing a great job, keep going. Help is coming. Your approach is better than what we currently have. Oh, you're just being silly. I think the fact that I kept being told that obviously made me doubt myself and think that I was going crazy. But I wasn't. And then the second I noticed it was having a really bad impact on my mental health, I removed myself from the situation. And I'm really glad that I did that, because I don't think I'd be here talking to you if I didn't. But I don't know what else I could have done. Like, we did start those return to work conversations during my voluntary leave, I was asking for this return to work form, which I've still never seen. Like, almost 2 years later, I've never seen that form. I was offering different solutions for what I could come back to do. I was doing everything I possibly could to get back to work. And yeah, nothing in return.
I have to apologize for my face.
That's okay.
I can't. I definitely don't have a poker face.
No, and I think when I tell people, that's the response that everyone has, because they're like, wait, what, this actually happened to you?
Yeah.
How? And I think, yeah, I still don't understand, because nobody has explained it to me. And I don't think I'm ever going to understand it.
I wonder if they even understand.
I don't think so. I don't think they understand what they've done. But then, like, I know the people and they know me and they know what I was like before all of this. And they knew that I was struggling. The fact that I obviously took extended time off proves that. And so I've stopped thinking about it, though, because I know I'm never going to get answers to those questions. So I've closed that and just moved on. Yeah.
That's great to hear, because I know how tough it is. And
yeah.
When you raise these issues to management and you put in complaints, you spoke to them, what was the outcome? What did they say? What did they do? I feel like the answer is
nothing. Nothing. So when I eventually did get back to work, which was 3 months after my work-related mental injury claim was approved, so it took them 3 months to find me suitable duties, and we submitted a formal complaint, my dad and I. The outcome to that complaint, I still don't have a resolution. The outcome was, your highly valued member of the team will find you work. But that was from a team that hadn't spoken to me in almost a year at that point. So clearly I'm not a highly valued member of the team, because if I was, you would have found me work a lot earlier, 6 months earlier, or 7 or 8 months by that point. Yeah. So it was all words, and it was all very hollow.
And there's a huge misalignment between what they were saying and what they were doing.
Yeah.
So what do you wish had happened instead?
I wish they'd listened to me and taken my concern seriously. I think that the things they were raising, they were legitimate issues. However, I think because I got a reputation as a fixer, I'd been there for 8 years, and it had gotten to a point where if you needed something done, go to Jess because she'll do it. And so I think that they didn't understand why it was impacting me the way that it was. And the fact that I was raising these concerns, that didn't strike them as odd, but it should have. Because I usually just get on with my work and I do it. And if they'd taken them seriously, I never would have ended up on leave. And none of that ever would have happened. I probably would have stayed in that role for like 2 more months and then left. But that's not what happened. I also wish that they had systems and processes in place to deal with staff who go on voluntary leave, extended leave. And I know that systems and processes is boring, but if you're, particularly with mental health, if you want to get back to work, part of that is understanding the process and understanding what's going to happen to you. Because with anxiety in particular, you immediately go worst case scenario. So if you can have a checklist or something that says, okay, you've got to complete this form, then this is going to happen, and then we'll do this, and then you can do this, that would have alleviated so much of the anxiety I was experiencing at the time. And it would have got me back to work.
And given them some actionable steps to follow instead of emailing you an hour before you were back with them prior to the weekend. Wow. So what did happen? Did you end up staying, or you left, or what was...
So I went back in a reduced capacity and slowly started increasing my hours. So that was 9 months after. I then kept asking what happens next, because with work cover, you're only covered, or with workers' comp, you're only covered for a year. And the response I kept hearing was, once the year's up, we have no legal obligations to you. So the person who was supposed to help get me back to work was telling me our legal obligations end to you. And that's not a solution. That doesn't get me back to work. That doesn't give me any clarity about my future. So a week before their legal obligations ended, I submitted my resignation to the CEO, because I genuinely didn't know who to submit it to, because while I was away, I got a new boss that no one told me about. So I genuinely didn't know who to submit it to. So I thought I'll go to the CEO. I outlined everything that had happened to me. And the response I received is, I hope with time you'll be able to look back on your experience positively, because I'd been there for 8 years at that point. But I think that final year, it doesn't matter how much career progression I got and how many people I met and the work that I was able to achieve there, none of that matters when I had that year that I had. So I obviously submitted my formal complaint. I requested 3 times to do an exit interview. I finally received it. I said in that I'm more than happy to share my experience so you can use it as a case study so it doesn't happen to anybody else. I also filed a complaint with WorkSafe Victoria, but nothing's happened with that. But I'm happy now because I've done everything I possibly can. So when something happens, it's not if, it's when. It's all documented, and they can't say they didn't know that there was a problem.
Yeah. Is there anything that you would change looking back? Anything that you would do differently, or?
I think there's 2 things that I would have done differently. The first is before any of this happened. So in 2019, we went through a restructure, and I could have taken a redundancy. I made the mistake, though, of talking to the senior leaders that I trusted within the organization. And they convinced me that it would be a stupid idea to let go of an ongoing position during a global pandemic. And I listened to them. And then I realized later that the reason they were telling me that is that my skill set was too valuable to lose, which I think is ironic when you consider what happened. But I wish I'd taken that redundancy. The second thing, I wish I'd told my dad earlier. So my dad is kind of he's always been the person that I trust and go to for career advice. I didn't tell him though, because when I was telling him about the issues I was raising, his response was the same as everyone at work. And so I didn't think he'd understand. Mm-hmm. But obviously he did. And we've subsequently had a lot of conversations about why I was feeling the way that I was feeling and why it was impacting me the way that it was. And what I understand is that he's obviously thinking about it from his perspective and his experience at work. Whereas I'm the type of person that I need to have more in my job. So I think Dan Pink's motivational theory perfectly sums up my approach to work. So it's a Venn diagram of autonomy, purpose, and mastery. And in my new job, I wasn't getting any of those. Mm. And so I need to have all of those to be fulfilled. And I wasn't getting any of them in that role. Yeah. So there was no way that, it was going to work out. Maybe if I'd had one or two of those, it may have been different. But having none, that was really hard for me.
What an experience. And the support network is so key. Then you're not isolated. You're not as isolated. You don't feel as alone, and you've got someone else to kind of voice your concerns to, and know that you're not going crazy. Because I understand why you would be feeling that way, especially when the words and the actions don't match. And again, I'm so sorry that you've experienced
Thank you.
that. But is there any advice that you would give someone who's maybe in a similar situation?
Yeah. So I have 3 pieces of advice. The first is it's about the culture of the organization. And I know that culture is a buzzword at the moment, but it really is the most important thing for employees, particularly to feel psychological safety. And I think because I was there for 8 years, you kind of see these red flags and you just kind of brush them off. You joke about it, but they are telling you something. The reason that they're your warning. They're your warning to get out. It didn't really become clear to me, though, the full extent of it until I'd submitted my resignation. And someone I'd worked with for years jokingly said, "Oh, did we traumatize you too much?" And I think the fact that that was an acceptable joke to make, that perfectly sums up the culture of that place. It's really toxic. And she was really apologetic when I told her what had happened, but it still doesn't excuse the fact that that is an acceptable joke to make someone who's leaving. The second piece of advice I have is for anyone who might have a colleague or friend who is experiencing this. So when you're going through it, it is really, really lonely. And it's really hard because you don't know what's happening. And in my case, I know there were a lot of friends who wanted to reach out, but they thought it was going to be too weird or awkward or uncomfortable. So they just didn't say anything to me. And I wish that they'd just sent me a message. So even if you send, "How are you?" or "Thinking of you," know that we're seeing it and it means a lot. We just might not reply, but we are seeing it and we really appreciate your support. I was really fortunate to have a few really good friends who did stick by me throughout all of it. And one I'm really grateful to, she called me every single day. I didn't realize she was doing it at the time, but she called me every single day. That became my reason to get out of bed because I would talk to her. And it is really, really important that you do, as you said before, have that support network around you, because that is the difference between you getting through it okay and really, really struggling. And I think I was in lockdown at the time as well. So that was another layer of complexity because I live alone. So I truly was isolated from everything. Yeah. And then the third piece of advice, if you take nothing else away from this podcast, prioritize your health.
Yes.
Always prioritize your health. I know that it can be hard if you are struggling in paycheck to paycheck, but I was in that situation as well. And then it got to a point where they did stop paying me for a month, but I survived. And once you lose your health, you lose everything. It's really hard to get it back. And I think that we're always told if you got hit by a bus, work would replace you tomorrow, but it really is true. So if your health is being impacted by work, leave however you need to, take leave, take unpaid leave, quit, whatever you need to do, get out of there so that you can focus on your health and get better.
Yeah, it's great advice. And yeah, coming from someone who has really experienced trauma.
I know that what I experienced was traumatic, but I'm still, like, over a year later, I still struggle with that term, using that term and considering what I went through trauma, even though it was. And I'm talking about that a little bit on the blog as I start to kind of identify more with that term. But it's something you don't usually associate with work. You don't associate trauma with work. It's supposed to be a place you go for fun and to see your friends and to see how your work is impacting something bigger and being part of something bigger and being able to contribute. It's not a place you go to be traumatized.
Is there anything else that you wanted to share before we wrap up?
Just one thing, remember that you will get through it. It may be really hard and you may not see the light at the end of the tunnel, but know that it is there somewhere. Just focus on what you can control, because even if that's 1% of what's happening, that 1% will get bigger.
Yes.
And it's only by focusing on what you can control that you can start to actually make an impact and actually see change.
And I love the saying, which it says exactly what you're saying, is this too shall pass.
Yeah. One of the things that really got me through was an Epictetus quote. So he's a Stoic. He said, it's not what happens, but how you react. And I think that really got me through, particularly the work cover stuff and everything that came after, because all this stuff was just happening to me, but I still had the power to control how I thought about it. And I think that's why I can laugh about it, because I had reframed it in my mind when it was happening.
Yes.
And we forget how powerful our mind actually is.
Definitely. And experiences like this actually make us stronger. Like, you have learnt so much through it and you've come out the other end stronger. And the people on the other side don't sound like they've learnt anything. So yeah, you've been able to reframe it and use your experience for good and to help others. But I've been there. Sometimes it takes months, years, and it's shitty, but it will pass and you will get through it. So I think that is really great advice. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. It takes so much bravery and courage to talk about your experience, and I think you've done that really well. So yeah, thank you once more for coming on and for sharing your story.
Thank you.
So if people want to connect with you, how should they best do that?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is probably the best place. And if you're interested in the work that I've been doing, my blog is theselfparadox.com. And so I'm working on a framework, which you can read all about over there.
Wonderful. I'll link directly to those.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jess.
Thanks, Nicole.